the technical knowledge that's required has gone way, way down compared to what it was when we were all shooting film. And because of that, it's made the universe of trying to earn some money in photography more difficult than it ever was. If you think when you walk out of here, you're going to get 6 jobs by Friday, you're going to be very, very disappointed. My goal is to help you such that when you do get a job, that you get paid fairly, that you control the use of your pictures, that you potentially have reuse of your images, that things are in writing so there are no misunderstandings. Nothing is worse than losing a client because of a misunderstanding, and the misunderstandings usually occur because there was nothing in writing. So we're going to talk a lot about the paperwork trail and keeping yourselves happy and wholesome and hopefully with sufficient money so that if and when you do get a job, it's done well and right and you have a happy client and hopefully they'll hire you again. So we have a lot to do. I normally teach this as a 2 full-day class, a weekend workshop at ICP. And so I'm going to squeeze 2 days into 2 hours. I'm going to ask you in general to hold your questions until the end because when we get into things like copyright and model releases, we always get bogged down in a million questions. So this is really an overview of some of the ways that I think you should work, some of the things you should do to protect yourself and make a little more money than you might be making and be a little happy photographer. So let's get going here. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. What's interesting is I recently got an ad online that looks like this. Can you take simple photos like the ones below? If so, you could make up to $5,000 week after week. Now, I know that's pretty difficult photography. I don't know if you people can make pictures that good. But if so, you could theoretically make $250,000 a year taking pictures of a pot. So go for it. So here's what most people think of being a photographer, that it's just all this kind of stuff. Right? So many people who don't know about photography think that that's what it is because they see ads like this. And the truth is, if you think you really want to be creative sports photographer, you may wind up in a pen like that or with a bunch of other people like this. So it's not quite as glamorous as people make it out to be. The fact is, I'm going to be treating this as a business. And it's a business wherein you make pictures occasionally. You will spend very little time behind a camera, I'm afraid, if you want to make money. So the picture part, of course, that's the easy part. The business part is what? Yeah, this is the business part. Oh, darn. And of course, last but not least, it's that. So this is what happens when you're a freelancer or a photographer. Right? You are the entire business. You have no help, you have no assistants, you have no accountants, you have no marketing people. You've got to do it all. And that's a really big burden. For people who have a job somewhere, they do a job, and then there's all the support staff around them. As a freelance, there is no support staff. You are everything. And this is what happens to the vast majority of people. It's a real burnout business for a lot of photographers, because while they make great pictures, they don't do the business aspect of it very well. And so people think, well, they hear stories and they think, wow, I've heard photographers making a few $1,000s a day. Real world, and don't write this down, these are typical fees that maybe at least in New York that people get for various types of work. Some people will get more, some people will get less. This is just a generalization of the kind of fees that people are getting for the work. But the issue is that these numbers are the gross amount. That's what the check says that you put in your pocket. But it's not going to be usable. But when people say they know I do, for example, corporate location shoots, and it's not unusual for me to, quote, charge $2,000 a day. So people think, wow, that $2,000 just goes into my pocket, and $2,000 a day, 5 days a week, wow, that's $10,000 a week. I'm going to really be, in Fat City, I'm going to make $500,000 a year. It doesn't happen that way. So let's look at the older prices from a few years ago. So a typical wedding might have been $3,000 to $6,000, and today with competition and simple cameras, the prices have dropped considerably. Stock photography, which I know a lot about, and I was very successful in it at one time when the prices were higher. Now the prices have come down dramatically, and most stock photo sales are about $20. In the old days, they were $500. High-end fashion is still fairly strong. Annual report fees are the same, but very few companies now use photographers to do the annual reports. They used to be full of pictures, and now, if they're lucky, there's a picture of the CEO and the board of directors, and that's it. Portraits on location, prices have come down. I have a friend who does that. Corporate location shoots, also prices have come down. And newspapers, what's left of them, the prices have also come down. So it's a more difficult universe out there that you folks have to deal with. So you're running a business, and whether it's a full-time business or a part-time business, you're going to have overhead and expenses. And overhead is what it costs just to live and breathe, right? We all have overhead, whether we want to be photographers or deadbeats. We all have this kind of overhead. If you want to run a business, then you're also going to have expenses, and expenses look something like that. All the things you have to do to get work or to do the work, those are your expenses. Back in the film days, believe it or not, I had to buy all this equipment. And those were the film days. I haven't used these in 10 or 12 years, and so the value of this equipment right now is probably maybe something like that. So, too bad. So switching over to digital, I had to make big investments in digital, and so I spent numbers maybe about that. That's a rough estimate. But there's always new stuff, new hard drives, bigger files, more software. So over the last few years, I've had to spend that much. And even now, when I want to get new bodies or upgrade new lenses, it's still costing me a few $1,000s a year. And because I do a lot of travel photography now, I wanted to get a more small compact system. And so I've just invested almost $8,000 into the Fuji mirrorless system. So it's constant expenses, constant expenses. Let's take an example. Let's say you're a magazine shooter, all right? And a decent magazine, not all the magazines, a decent magazine may be paying $400 as a day rate. And if you're a real hotshot, maybe you'll be lucky enough to shoot for 100 days. So at the end of the year, you're going to gross $40,000. You should be so lucky. But that's going to be, of course, your gross income. Maybe you're a wedding photographer. Maybe a typical wedding you do is $3,000. If you're really good and very lucky, maybe you'll do 20 weddings a year, and so that will give you $60,000 a year. Again, that is the gross amount, not what you're going to be able to keep. Now, you got money, you got to spend money, right? So you're going to have personal expenses which have nothing to do with your business. And these are very low numbers depending on where you live, and your other expenses, they may be higher. Some things you may not need. I did not have health insurance for the first 15 years when I was starting out as a photographer. You may not have a car, so you don't need car insurance. But if you add all that up, I'm going to guess typically if you live in New York, your expenses are going to be somewhere in the $40,000 to $50,000 range just for living. Some of it may be tax deductible, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now you're going to spend money if you're running a business. You're going to have all this stuff if you're running a business. And you're going to have all this stuff maybe, or some of it. Or you may need some of these things. This is all going to cost you money. And a few things are tax deductible. In fact, many of these things are tax deductible, but it still costs you money. And so maybe your gross outgo, depending on the kind of work you do, and there's a number that I came up with that might be appropriate depending on what you're doing. If you're doing a lot of work, it'll be higher. If you're doing less work, it might be lower. And you probably know that you have all these little expenses. How many times have you been to this store and left with a wallet that's a few $100s less? There's always something new, something you have to buy. New memory cards, a bigger hard drive, filters, on and on and on. Now, a lot of these things are tax deductible. People say, wow, Lester, you know, everything you do is deductible. Well, kind of, it's true, but here's the thing. Just because it's deductible doesn't mean you don't pay for it, right? Here's an example. Let's say you buy a box of paper to do your portfolio. You have to have $100 to buy the box of paper. It is a legitimate business expense. So effectively, your income is reduced by $100. but you have to have the $100 to buy it, and it doesn't take $100 off your taxes. It takes $100 off your income base. And depending on your income level, you may have to pay the whole $100, or it may reduce your taxable income by a few bucks, but it's still your out-of-pocket expense. It's not free. So look at some basic math. Let's say your income is somewhere between the magazine and the wedding photographer. You have personal expenses, business expenses, and when you get done, you're out of luck a little bit and you wind up like that. So we're going to try to concentrate on having you photograph and do your business in the way that that bottom line is not red, but it's in the black to some degree. And so the big conclusion is, if you want to profit instead of losing money, you've got to run your business as a business. So let's give you a few examples. Some people think of photography as fashion, wedding, or photojournalism, and that's all they know. But there's so many other areas that people get into that can earn you some bucks, and maybe a specialty would be better for you than trying to compete with everybody else. So if you're a freelancer, people think, wow, it's great. People who have jobs, they envy me. They say, oh, Lester, your life is so great because you can set your own hours, you do what you want, you have creative freedom, and you don't have to deal with stupid clients, which is never the case, because the reality, of course, is this, right? It's insecure, it's very uneven, you run the business, hours can be crazy, and you don't have any of the benefits that somebody with a real job has. And just to look at some of the careers in picture making, these are some of the ones that some people may think of as typical, but it goes on and on and on into people who specialize. Some people just photograph auto sports. They know a lot about cars, they hang out with the drivers, and that becomes a specialty for them, and they're not competing with everybody else in the business. And on and on. So there are lots of specialties. There are people who just do equestrian photography or forensics, and they work with lawyers. So there are many other possibilities rather than just the 2 or 3 or 4 that most people think of as the obvious thing for photographers to do. In big cities like New York, there are people who are known to be specialists. The people who do ads for beer and wine and liquor, they're the pours and splashes people. Food photography is a real specialty in the big city, and on and on and on. Jewelry is very hard to do. If you're a good jewelry photographer, you might do very well. And then, of course, fashion is very specialized in New York. If they know you for doing men's fashion, you may never be called for doing women's fashion. It's gotten so specialized. And there are a few coveted full-time jobs, but not many, and they're disappearing faster and faster. Some of you may know that I think last summer, the Chicago Sun-Times laid off their entire staff of 31 photographers in one day. They all lost their full-time jobs. So there are a few full-time jobs that some people luck out, and it's a very different way of being a photographer and earning a living. You may think photojournalism is a wonderful way to earn a living, and you may want to go into conflict zones and take pictures like this. If you're fortunate enough, you may get your picture on the front page of the New York Times, and you know what kind of credit you're going to get for your picture on the front page of the New York Times? It says that. You don't even get a credit line very often. Newspapers more and more are running fewer and fewer of these feature stories. This is one from a few years ago that was done by Monica Almeida, who was very good. She's no longer working full-time for the New York Times. But when she was there, she also had to do bread and butter shots like this. Here's another great sports picture. I thought this was a really great shot. And it was taken by the very famous photographer, the Associated Press. Again, no credit line for the photographer who made a great picture. Magazine work used to be very appealing. They used to run great stories. Photojournalists love to do that kind of work. Anyone get U.S. News and World Report magazine? You can't get it. It doesn't exist anymore. I think there's something online, but it's not a printed publication, and they don't hire many photographers. Even when you do get hired, very often the ability to earn additional money from your pictures has been pulled away by some of the big publishers, so that when you used to get syndication rights for your pictures, very often now you're losing the ability to make additional money on the pictures that you initially shot. If you're a hotshot, anyone know who did these famous pictures? This was a series of ads that Annie Leibovitz did for American Express. I thought they were fantastic pictures. Michael O'Neill, another great magazine photographer. So there are some people out there doing some really great work. This is a story he did on retired boxers. And then there are specialists like Richard Tremaine. You'll see his work a lot in the arts sections of newspapers and magazines because he's a specialist in theater and performing arts photography. So he's specialized in the way he's the go-to guy for type of work like that. Another thing that's occurred in the last few election cycles is politicians have realized that they've got to be media savvy and they've got to have good work. And I know a number of people who get, maybe a 6-month or a 1-year gig following some politician around and being their official photographer and making a lot of money until they lose the election and they're out of a job. There's still the tabloid magazines in the supermarkets. If you know the celebrities and you're willing to do this kind of stuff, it's still a business, but it's not paying as much as it used to because too many people are doing it, and very often people are using cell phones and they're not going to hire you. Still, a sturdy business is fashion photography. It's very hard to do. You've got to be really an excellent photographer. It still pays well, and if you want to see great photography, look at fashion magazines. I personally have no interest in fashion. You're looking at me all dressed up here. But if you want to see great photography, look through fashion magazines. There's some really great stuff. And of course, while you're doing fashion shoots, you may have to do the bread and butter pictures. Architectural photography is another specialty. You have to be good. People still want high quality work, not cell phones. But it's technically very challenging, but it is still a business, although there's more competition than ever before. So if you finally get a job and you've completed the job, you're unemployed every time you get paid and the client says, thank you, now get out of here. And so these are the problems. You have a job and you have no job. You have a job and you have no job. Here's a graph when I started out doing assignment work. In February, I didn't get any sleep. The phone kept ringing and I was making a lot of money. And then in April, May, June, and July, the phone didn't ring at all. And you start picking up the phone to make sure there's still a dial tone, So every photographer, I don't care how famous they are, will have graphs that look like this. And you've got to be willing to understand that. So sometimes after trying very hard, people say, I just can't do it as a freelancer. It's killing me. And so there are related fields where people love pictures, they love photography, but they're not trying to make a living shooting, so to speak, or doing freelance work. So there are related careers that a lot of people wind themselves up in, but not necessarily as picture makers. And they do the picture making on the weekends, and they have a lot of personal satisfaction, and they're not trying to make money doing it. So there's even more related careers that some people find themselves in. Even more. And it's a big world of pictures. It's just not being a freelancer in the traditional sense of making pictures. While you're trying to make pictures, here's some advice I give you, is try to do more than one thing than just going snap. Personal example, Sojourns magazine saw one of my pictures on the Getty website, but they contacted me because they wanted a bigger file because they were going to run it as a double-page spread. Talking to the person, she said they're going to put some information about the photograph. I said, hey, I can write. So I did the writing, and not only did I get the stock fee, but I also got the writing fee, which took me maybe an hour. So I tell people, I can photograph and I can write. Maybe you can photograph and you know audio, or maybe you know a second language. It's always helpful to be more than just a one-trick pony. And along with that, I'm going to give you some fatherly advice here, and that is learn video. I bet you all have cameras that shoot video, and maybe you haven't done it, but it's another extra you can add to your client's quotation and say, by the way, if you want, I can do some video. And they'll say, oh, that's cool, yeah, why don't we do some video also? Obviously, you charge them more. So something to think about since you all have a video capability in your cameras. And so I'm going to give you more advice also, and it's learn video. And I have one more thing to say about that. Another bit of fatherly advice is you might want to learn video. How do you protect your income stream? And one of the best ways we're going to talk about is copyright. I get lots and lots of questions about copyright all the time. And so I put this little thing together here about copyright, right? And it's a way of obtaining extra income, protecting your rights so that you can resell the picture, because very often you just are not going to make enough money on the shoot. And so at the beginning you think, well, you'll charge for the shoot and that will be your income. But when you start staying in the business a long time, as I have, money starts coming in out of the sky because you own the rights to the picture, and you can sometimes repurpose it and sometimes make more money on the repurposing than you did on the original shoot. So here's what the copyright law says in the US. And you folks watching at home, if you're in a different country, this may or may not pertain to the copyright laws of your country. So in the US, when you go click, it's your picture. The law, I believe, says the creator of the work is automatically vested in the copyright. So you go click, you legally own it. In the old days, you're supposed to put your copyright notice on the work. Today, you do not have to do it, but it's still advised. You do not have to register your work in Washington, D.C., but if you want to sue somebody, you have to do that. And it's good for your life plus 70 years, so it has a lot of implications to your heirs. If you have a big collection of work, it may have a lot of value long after you're dead. So when you work with somebody, you don't sell your pictures. They're not buying your pictures. They're buying your service to create pictures, which you should own. So you license the use of your images. You should not be selling them. And this is what I said earlier, that you can have substantial income by relicensing them to the same client or to somebody else later on. And as you'll hear me pound on your heads in a little bit, you do definitely want to put things in writing. If you transfer, you can sell your copyright. You can give your copyright to someone else and then they own it, but that by law has to be in writing. If you're an employee, you do not own the copyright. So let's say you're an accountant in a company and the boss comes to you and says, listen, I hear you're a photographer, you have a Canon or Nikon. Do us a favor and take a picture of the boss we need for the annual report. Now, photography is not your job there, but you're working for the company and therefore they own the picture, not you. So you should know that. There's something called work for hire, where temporarily you're an employee of whoever hired you. And therefore, again, you do not own the work, and you've got to watch out for work for hire clauses in agreements and contracts and purchase orders. If someone suggests how to make a picture, they don't own the copyright. The copyright is only substance in the expression, in the painting, in the book, in text, or in the picture. So you own the image. And if somebody even uses a part of it, they have violated your copyright. Now, you can register your work if you want. It's inexpensive and relatively easy to do, and I'll go through that in a second. But if your work is not been registered in Washington, it's really hard to sue because you're not going to get very much money and no lawyer will probably take your case. And you only get actual damages, which means what they should have paid in the first place. But if you register your work, then there's potential for big bucks. And under the US copyright law, the statutory damages are up to $150,000, up to $150,000 if you've registered the work. And the collection means if you've registered 100 pictures at one bunch and somebody infringes on 2 of them, well, that's considered one infringement because they were all registered together. And it's also up to the judge. You don't always get the $150,000. Here's what happens in most cases. It's a wild west out there, as you know, on the internet, and a lot of people think once they hire you, they own the pictures. And so they have no comprehension of copyright. High-level clients do, and they'll put something in their agreement or purchase order that basically steals your copyright. And so when I'm pricing a job, the copyright license, how they're going to use it, what they're going to do, has an effect on how I charge my clients. And this is what happens for sure, is I have so many people come to me with sob stories about what happened to them, and it's because nobody understood what was going on here with who owns the work and how it can be used. So if you want to copyright prior to the infringement, you've got to register before, not after, right? Unless it's a huge violation. If someone uses your picture on a billboard, you can still make a lot of money even if you haven't registered it prior to the infringement. But in general, you have to register before. Also, if you're a photojournalist and do work quickly, Section 412 of the copyright law says that you actually have a 3-month grace period to register it after you give it to your client. There are 2 types of registration. The one I use all the time is for unpublished work, and there's another type of registration for published work, and it's a different way of listing them when you register it. So you can, let's say you took pictures 2 years ago when they were in the book. You can certainly go and register them tomorrow at the Copyright Office, so if anybody infringes on the pictures from today on, you can still have a case against them. So you can register both unpublished work, which is the easiest, and you can register already published work, which takes a little more work in terms of listings at the Copyright Office. So you can do things by mail, which I used to do, I don't do anymore. You can download this 1-page form, and it doesn't matter how many pictures. There is no limit to how many pictures you can register at once, right? So what I used to do is I'd make a contact sheet for myself, I'd burn small files to a disk, and I'd send them off to the Copyright Office. I made small JPEGs. That's all you have to do. You don't need big files to send to the Copyright Office. I'd fill out the form, burn a disk, send a check. You'll see that check says $45, but today, if you do it by mail, it's now $85. And then make sure you have proof that you sent it in, because the date on the FedEx ticket is the date of the copyright, not when you finally get the form back from the Copyright Office, which could easily be a year later. So here's an example. I sent this form in 2008, but the certificate didn't come until 2009. But the valid date is the day I sent it in. Now, I do it electronically. It's much faster and quicker. And so you go to copyright.gov, and you read all the stuff, and it's not so straightforward. It's typical of the US government. But now you can do thousands of pictures for $55. Again, I make contact sheets for myself. And then here's one I just did recently. There's the certificate that came in the mail. And you can see that the certificate says it's good as of February 27th when I uploaded it, but I didn't receive the form in the mail until a few days ago. But the valid time is when I sent it in. And you can see at that time I sent in 1,087 photos all at once. The limit, I think, is 129 megabytes. And I send lots of small JPEGs, so I've never, you can send 2,000, 3,000, and you still would not be going over the limit. And then I put my contact sheets and disks in a folder, and that's it. It just stays there forever, and my heirs can look at it. If you're going to send in published work, there's a different form. Just be careful that you have the right form. The Photo Shelter has a lot of free publications. Download this, it's really helpful. The Photographer's Guide to Copyright. It's from photoshelter.com. There's a lot of helpful free publications for photographers. Highly recommended. So, someone suggested I do work for the Landmarks Preservation Commission in New York City, and they sent me this big contract, and unlike some of you, I read every single word. And I was reading it, and something caught my attention in the little fine print, and it said this. See that? Work for hire. It means, and they say, actually they spell it out, some people hide it. They say, because it's, quote, work for hire, they own it all, and I have no rights to the work. I can't even put it on my website unless I ask nicely, because it's theirs, not mine. All right, and here's what the Copyright Office says. When a work qualifies as a work made for hire, the person who hired you is considered the owner of the work. So you can do work for hire, but understand the ramifications, because in the future, you have no rights to resell the pictures or do anything with them. Here's why copyright sometimes is useful. This photographer, it says they were awarded $1.3 million because the photographer had filed prior to the infringement, and it all added up, including attorney's fees, for $1.3 million. This does not happen a lot, but it does happen. Here's another example. I do a lot of industrial work, and I saw a magazine ad, and I said, boy, there's something about that ad that looks really familiar. And I'm looking at that big shovel and truck. I said, damn, that looks so much like one of my pictures. But it's an illustration. It's not my picture. I said, let me see if I overlay the illustration on top of my picture. I wonder what it will look like. And it's exactly the same thing. So someone traced over my picture, and therefore they are big time in violation of my copyright. So things like this happen. This is a long time ago. I didn't know a lot about it. I called up the company. They gave me the graphic designer. She was a sweet young thing. And anyway, I got a few $100s. I think today I'd be a lot tougher. Right now, by the way, just to show you, Canadian law is very different. Canadian photographers do not own their pictures when they go click. It's very different from country to country. Paperwork. Oh, everybody loves paperwork, right? We all love paperwork, right? And so we're going to need a paper trail if we're going to do business properly. And here's Chinese proverb number 1. Have you ever heard this expression? Right? It's really true. So many people get into fights. They say, oh, I thought you said, no, I didn't say that. You said that, but no, you told me you were going to do that. You're crazy if you don't put things in writing. You can avoid lots of unhappiness and losing clients by having things in writing, so that everyone understands what's going on. Guaranteed that will happen. You've got to run your business with paperwork. So, a list, and then we'll go into some of this in more detail. When someone calls me, I immediately start taking notes. Based on the notes, you will send them a quote. That's paper, so to speak. Once the quote is discussed and maybe changed a little bit, then you send them a final agreement. And you get them to sign the final agreement. If they are a big company and they send you a purchase order, I read it all. I keep track of everything. You'll see with expenses, if you want to get your IRS deductions, you've got to keep track of the expenses. That's more paper. If it's appropriate, you may need model releases. That's paper. Then you're going to send an invoice. That's more paper. And then if you give someone a license that has a time limit, you'll want to know when it expires so you can go back to them and say, hey, you owe me more money. Networking is important. I write it down. Technical notes, if appropriate. Tear sheets. A tear sheet is if something was printed in a newspaper or magazine, you tear it out. Today, not so many tear sheets. Do a screen grab, and then keep that. You might want to show it in your portfolio if it's appropriate. Here was an article in Photo District News. Client had to pay $66,000. A kill fee means they canceled the job at the last minute. And without going into the who, what, and where, turns out that the importance of a paper trail which established indisputable facts that helped this guy win without a trial because he had it in writing. Here's the homepage of the American College of Surgeons. That is a fantastic photograph. Isn't that a great picture on there? I mean, don't you love that photograph? Isn't it one of the best pictures you've ever seen? You betcha. So here's what happened. I licensed that picture to them, and here's the email I sent to them about a year later. Right? So because I have a paper tickle file, I was able to keep track of it. Right? So I sent her a nice note, and it says, continues, it says this. So it's just business, right? We had a license. Which I didn't say that. That's a joke. Anyway, because I had a tickle file, I got another $250 for a simple little email and an invoice. Paper. Right? Here's another license agreement for some company now, and this is going to expire in March of next year. I gave them a 5-year license. You better believe in March of next year or a little before, I will send them a happy little note saying, by the way, guys, would you like to continue the license? They are not going to contact me. And the fact is they'll use the picture forever unless I raise my hand and say, excuse me, do you still want to use the pictures? And they'll say, oh yes, of course we were going to contact you. Sure. So, in keeping with all of that, what do you think? Without what? Right? What else? It's marketing. And all of that is important. All right, so when I send out a proof, you can see I emboss my name right on the picture. On the digital files, I have my name at the beginning of my file number. All of this helps. Very often people find out an old picture. They're trying to say, who shot this picture? It's very easy for them to know it's my picture. When I used to send out discs, which we don't do much anymore, again, I wrote my name and copyright and contact information right on the disc. If you do an architectural shoot and the client wants to reproduce it, you can't put your name right on the picture. But what I do is in the bottom, I add a little strip of black and I put my contact information, which they'll crop out for the ad, but it's on the digital file. And one day if somebody's trying to find out who took this great picture, my name is on the bottom of the file. You should also learn how to embed your copyright information in metadata. You can do this through Lightroom, you can do it through Photoshop. And so it's embedded in the metadata, and most high-end clients know how to find the metadata and contact you in the future if appropriate. So when I send out prints, my name always goes under the picture if it's appropriate. If it's not appropriate on the front, I put a label on the back. It's all marketing as much as anything else. Alrighty, let's talk about getting your portfolio out into the world. You all have a dilemma, right, if you're a beginning photographer, right? This is a dilemma. Too bad. And so the answer to that is what? Right? You got to do it yourself. Everybody has a story of how they built up their portfolio. You've got to do it yourself. So my little story is like so many people. I was in my late 30s when I said I want to be a photographer. And so I have an engineering background. I said, let me do industrial, scientific, technical photography a little different than what other people do. I had no pictures, literally no pictures. So I saw a magazine and they had this pretty set of gears. I borrowed the gears at great expense and I shot this for my portfolio. Little did I know that this would be one of my best-selling pictures eventually. It's been used many, many times and I have made a lot of money on this picture. But it was done for me, not for a client. It's been used over and over and over again. And I wanted to do medical work, so I went to the pharmacy and I got, remember the contact time capsules? Right? I got the contact capsules, and then I needed a picture of a skull, so I killed one of my assistants and I used his skull. I'm a tough guy. I went down to Canal Street and got an old circuit board and shot that. And my mom and I in the kitchen, we played with food coloring and a bit of dry ice and made that. And then I went to Sears and bought some tools and I made that picture. And I bought a watch and returned it and made that picture. All on my own time and money and effort. Nobody paid me to do this. You make a portfolio that has the kind of pictures that you want people to hire you to make. You got that? It's so easy. So if tomorrow I wanted to say I'm a baby photographer, I could start photographing babies and people would think I'm a baby photography expert. That's what's so cool about being a photographer. They don't care if you went to college, what college. They don't even care if you graduated from elementary school. They want to see your pictures, period. It's really, really nice that way. So Robert White, a sculptor who I knew from Stony Brook University, said, Lester, I just finished this sculpture of General Pershing, and it's going to be cast in bronze, and it's going to be near the White House in Washington. Would you just come over and take a few pictures for me as a favor? So I went over, and I started talking to him about it, and I said, wow, how do they make a bronze statue out of this? He started explaining it to me, and I said, do you think they'd let me photograph? He said, I don't know, give him a call. So I called up the company. It's a privately owned company. It's very dangerous over there, flames and fires and stuff flying all over the place. And the guy said, yeah, sure, just be careful. You know, so they, for a whole year at my expense, and this is film, thousands of dollars worth of film, I had no lights except a $30 hot light and 2 umbrellas and a lot of extension cords. And I spent a whole year, not every day, but like once a month going over there, and I photographed the making of this statue, which for me as an engineer was fascinating to see how they do it. It's called the lost wax process. And I said, all right, well, maybe when I'm done, you know, I'll do a magazine article or I'll do a book or something like that. But I got very busy, and I never got to do anything. And there's Robert White. This is 2 blocks from the White House if you want to go and see it. But I never did anything with it, even though I spent all that money. And then a few years later, I got a call from an art director who said, Lester, we have a client who is importing these very expensive bronze statues, copies of famous Greek and Roman statues. Do you know anything about photographing statues? Do I know anything? I am the photographing statues expert. And so I got this very, very big job, which more than paid for all the free work I did on General Pershing, and I did the work inside and outside. They gave me lots of fancy brochures. So by doing stuff, good things happen. When I was getting started, I took out ads in so-called showcase books. It's not as big a deal today. The black book, I believe, still exists. But I paid a few $1,000s a page to advertise me as a photographer, and these books were given away to editors and art directors for free. And the thing is, even though I did it for 2 or 3 years in a row, I never got a job. I didn't get one job from all this advertising. But what I got was people asking me for use of my pictures for stock, which I didn't even know about. And then a stock photo agency in London contacted me, and that's how I got into stock photography. Even though the money I spent on the ads never got me a job, it got me started in other areas. You've got to get out there and stir the water and make your stuff available. Another example is someone recommended me, Amphoto was doing a series of simplified books, wedding photography simplified, landscape photography simplified, and they wanted a close-up book called Close-Up Photography Simplified. It was supposed to be 96 pages. So the guy called me and he said, could you come and meet with me in 2 days, and we'll talk about you doing a book. And I said, gee, I'm kind of busy, which was a lie, but I can see you like in 10 days. He said, okay, be here in 10 days. And what do you think I did in the intervening 10 days? I made a lot of macro pictures because I had nothing to show the guy. So I ran all over the place and I made macro pictures for a few days, a few in color. And not only did I get the contract for the book, even though the contract said 96 pages, I don't pay attention to things like that. And I wound up writing a 256-page textbook on close-up and macro photography. Now, it's pretty old, but I checked on Amazon the other day, and you can still buy this as a used book for 20 bucks, and it got a 4.5-star rating. So one day I'm going to revise it. But the important thing is I had to borrow equipment while I was doing the book. And there was a company in New Jersey called Burley Brooks. They don't exist anymore. And I borrowed from them a lot of bellows. And then when the book was done, I sent a copy of the book to Sam Yanes, who was their marketing director, as a thank you. The good thing that happened is Sam Yanes went to work one day for Polaroid Corporation. You ever hear of them? It used to be a big company at one time. And they were going to have this new 35mm instant film. And Sam had my book on his bookshelf, and he remembered me. So to make a long story short, I had a really big gig helping them introduce this new 35mm instant slide film, which probably none of you even know about. It was a bomb. But it was a good gig for me. And then I did that, and then a year or two later, I went to a presentation of a lot of multimedia shows, and I'm sitting in chairs just like you, and the lights came on, and I'm talking to a lady next to me, and we're chatting, and she says she works for Polaroid, and somehow she said, you know, that 35mm film, I'm in the publications office, and we're looking for someone to write a book about it. That's me, I've written. See you got to get out, stir the water, things happen. So I wound up writing this book for Polaroid, and I got paid very, 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 very well for that. And then Forbes called me, and this is early on before Photoshop or anything. They said, can you make a picture of a television? See, it says smart TV, but if you look at the date on the magazine, it's 1991. It's a different kind of smart TV than today. And they said, can you make a digital picture of the American flag? And I said, sure. And I walked out and said, I have no idea how to do that. But that got me started with doing some digital. I wanted to do annual reports, factories and warehouses and things like that. But I know when you do an annual report, you need pictures of the executives. You have to kind of do that also. I didn't have any pictures of executives, but I had a great friend, Murray Hillman, who had been on the board at AT&T, a handsome guy, had expensive suits, and so I now had pictures that looked, appropriate for an annual report. Because I did that on my own and had pictures like that, I got a call from CBS to do, what's this guy's name? Mike Wallace, thank you, all right? But if I hadn't had these pictures, they never would have hired me because they want to see people pictures. And then they liked the work I did of Mike Wallace, so anyone know who that is? That's Charles Kuralt. So now I got a book contract to do the cover of his book. And not only did I get to do the cover, right, but also later on, they wanted to do an audio tape, and of course, I owned the copyright. They were given rights only for the book cover. When they wanted to use the same picture on the audio tape, they had to come back to me, and for nothing, I made $1,500. Once I had pictures of famous people, when I went to do annual reports where you have to do all the people on the board, they saw that I knew how to photograph people. And Mike Wallace, they said, oh, you photograph Mike Wallace, you must be a good photographer. On the other hand, I like to do close-up work, and I have a lot of pictures of close-ups of flowers, and I'll tell you a secret, never got me any work. So, some you win, some you lose. My old girlfriend, Pat Blue, had never had anything published, but she was photographing a lot. You'll see the story in a minute. And the first thing she ever got published was an 8-page spread in Life magazine. Why? Because on her own, she started photographing this vivacious lady who tragically came down with multiple sclerosis. And once a week, once every 2 weeks, she would visit the lady in the hospital and then got permission to use the pictures. And in fact, there's a picture of Pat reading to the woman. And so this became a big spread in Life magazine, the first thing she ever did, but she did it all on her own time, her own expense. Then she was in good with Life magazine, so they hired her to do other stories. But everybody, you have to start out on your own. Jim Sheldon, someone I taught photography, before the Russians came, he went to Afghanistan and photographed this wild game called buzkashi. It's like polo with a beheaded calf. He had never published anything. He came back and he sold that story all over the world, but he did it on his own time and his own dime. So I believe, even though everyone wants to do something online, I believe you really should have both an online portfolio and a physical portfolio. And it should be appropriate for the market that you're going after. I don't like the word should, but sometimes you may have to do that. So depending on who you're going after, you might want something. This is my first portfolio case done with press on type. You're not old enough to know what press on type is. I also had these little these $4 portfolio cases made, and I used loose prints. These were laminated. And one of the things I learned a long time ago is every client you go to, you change what you're showing them. And by having a loose rather than a bound portfolio, I was able to make changes. If you're going after the fine art market, they like to see things that are very precious in these formal portfolio boxes. So you might want to do your presentation that way because that's what they expect. My fancy portfolio now when I go and see clients is I go to Staples and buy these $2.95 loose leaf books. That's my fancy portfolio. But the good thing is the prints inside are loose and I can constantly change them depending on the client I'm going to see. And I've learned a long time ago, they don't care about the leather bindings that a lot of photographers use. They care about your pictures. That's the most important thing. So if I want to see someone about a transportation job, I don't show them this, I show them that. On the other hand, many people want to be more modern, and you can put your work on a tablet or on your laptop. So when I was traveling in Alaska, I had a possibility of doing work in a company that made microchips. I didn't have a physical portfolio with me, but in Lightroom, I had thousands of files. Before I went to see the client, I pulled out some microchip photographs, made a little slideshow, very impressed the client, and so I was able to get the job because I had all my pictures with me in my laptop. So I have it both physical and I also have it electronically, or some people put it on a tablet. The trouble with a tablet or the computer, it's very linear. It's one picture at a time, whereas with a flip book, you can go back and forth a little easier. And some people just like to see a print. They're so tired of looking at a screen that when you come in with nice 11 by 14 prints, that's very, very impressive. This is some of the best advice I can give you. If you have exactly the kind of picture that a client has in their head, you got the job. Not pictures around it, but the exact same picture, you are 100% guaranteed to get the job. So when a client calls, when they say, drop off your portfolio or send me some pictures, I never do that. I try to find out exactly what they have in mind so I can put together something that's perfect just for them, right? And so you should not have a portfolio, but it should be constantly changing, constantly growing. When you tell me, I'm not shooting anymore because I don't have any clients, you should be out shooting and building your portfolio. So clients have a problem, you're there to help them. And this is the mistake that a lot of people do. Make sure you show them what they need, not what you have. So be careful. My piano anecdote. So client calls and says, hey, I hear you're a good photographer. I have this antique piano. It's going in Christie's auction catalog. I need someone who can photograph a piano. I said, great, you got me. I'm the guy. I love it. He says, so have you ever photographed a piano before? And I kind of dismissed his question. I said, well, don't worry. I'm a musician. He said, but have you ever photographed a piano before? And I said, no, but don't worry. I'll show you. P.S. He never let me come because I hadn't photographed pianos. What should I have done? Not lied. No, you can't lie. You have to show him pianos. So in the 3 intervening days, you run around like a madman and you photograph pianos. Seriously, that's what you do. That's what I did early on. I didn't have a big portfolio. I was always photographing a day before I went to see the client to show them exactly what they wanted. And it worked like a charm because I had the exact picture that they were looking for, if at all possible. All right, so I had this picture, but it's not a piano. He doesn't want to see that. Because of the annual reports, I wanted to do architecture. I had no architectural pictures, so I went to famous places and made pictures. Anyone know where this is? National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the East Wing. So I am benefiting from the fantastic architecture of IMP. It makes me look good because he has a glorious building. And I photographed around New York City. And this is the Lloyd's of London building, the insurance company. So because I had architectural shots, then when I went to Ladies' Home Journal, they said, oh, you know how to do architecture. And then when I had the Ladies' Home Journal, then I was able to show it to some local builders who needed pictures of their new building. So one thing leads to another, that leads to another, but you've got to do the work up front yourself. Annual reports said, oh, you know how to do architecture. So now I was able to show them pictures again, starting out by me doing sales. Before IKEA was even in the US, their New York City agency asked me to take some pictures of the IKEA furniture in their office. This is what they wanted. They wanted a desk shot, but I'm bored. I always do more than the client asks. So while I was there, I shot it during the day, and guess which one they used? Not the one they asked me to shoot, but the one I shot on my own. I'm always going the extra mile. They like the pictures. They have another Swedish company called Kosta Boda. It's like the Corning glass of Sweden. They make this great architectural work. So that led to a big project of photographing this amazing art glass. If someone calls me for my portfolio of heavy industry, I'll show them pictures that look like this. I'll show them pictures that look like this. And depending on who I'm showing it to, I might show this one or I might not. Because engineers don't want to see things like this. Art director might. Should I show this picture? Any ideas? No? Well, it's a heavy industry portfolio, right? You don't show circuit boards, and on top of that, if anyone knows anything about circuits, they'd laugh me out of the room because that circuit board is about 30 years old. So if I wanted to show circuit boards, I'd have to show something more modern. So when I go to see the industrial client, I don't show them these pictures, even though these have been very successful and have sold a lot. They're not industrial pictures. Don't show them. I do show them this. People love sunsets. I show them this one because if anyone knows anything about tools, this doesn't exist in the real world, and they think it's very cool. What about this one? Should I show them this? This is not an industrial picture. Right. I always show it. It's always the last picture in my portfolio because when people see it, they laugh. You know the expression, leave them laughing? It always works. So even though it has nothing to do with medical or electronic or scientific, that's always the last picture in my portfolio. Works fine. More advice about your portfolio. Don't show a lot of stuff. That's not good. Just show the great pictures. You don't need a lot. You need a lot of good stuff, right? You got it? And this is what I was just saying. The first and the last should be the best. It's kind of a marketing technique. Now, here's something else to consider. What do you think? You should always be building your portfolio. It should never be a static presentation. So keep that in mind. More things when you're building your portfolio, right? You've got to benefit from how your models, how the building, how the products look. People want to relate to the pictures that you have in your portfolio. This is something I see with a lot of people's portfolio or website. They have too many things that are the same, and it looks like you're a beginner. Shoot more. Don't have 6 pictures of the same scene. So if you have an online portfolio, how do you know how your online presence should look? Well, folks, it's real easy today. You can see what other people are doing. So you can go and you can Google photographer. How many hits do you think if you just Google the word photographer? Any idea? Make you feel good? All right. I did this the other day. That's a valid number. So let's narrow it down. So I did portrait photographer in New York City, okay? And there, it's a much smaller number. It's only 69,000 people. But you start clicking on some, and you're going to see some great work. And that should be your standard, not your lousy pictures, right? You should be impressed and say, wow, you know, how can I come to that level? Because that's your competition, folks, not your pictures. Matt Vaca, a former student of mine, I've watched him develop over the years. He now does a lot of great architectural work. If you want to do jewelry, go and see what the best jewelry photographers are doing in the city. Or Lou Manna, somebody I know well, specializes in food. You can't copy, you shouldn't copy, but you should see the level of quality that your competition is at with. This woman does beautiful, she's in the Midwest, and Shelley Paulson does just equestrian photography. Martin Sundberg does outdoor lifestyle. He does a lot of work for Nike and things like that. This is your competition. See what they're doing. Wedding photographers, I see a lot of bad wedding pictures, but not this guy. Yuri does beautiful work, and this should be your standard, not the stuff that you're doing. You should aspire to the good stuff. Tanya Constantine, a woman I know out in Oregon, also does great work. By the way, it's interesting, if you look at her pictures, what do you think she used to do before she was a photographer? She used to be a dancer, right? So she brings what she knows and what she feels comfortable with to her type of photography. Other people can't do that. I also recommend to some people, and there's a big argument about this, whether you should watermark your pictures on your website. A lot of the stock agencies do it. I don't know if anyone went to my website, but if you look on my website, there's my logo glued on all my pictures because I have very stealable, very usable pictures. Some people don't, and there's an argument as to whether you should or should not, but mine are very stealable. If you do famous celebrities, definitely should put your logo on or it's going to be all over the internet. You've got to have a website. You've got to have it. You may as well give up a camera if you don't have a website. So here's, I don't want to mention names, here's a photographer who had some very nice work on his website, very professional work, and then on the same website he's got a picture like that, and a picture like that. And then he goes back to something like this. It's very inconsistent. You just want the good stuff. You know, maybe this is the photographer's kid, but it's not a great picture, it doesn't belong on the website, right? He's got gorgeous stuff, and he's got a picture like this. You know, it shouldn't be there. And another, he's got one like this, which is not good, and he's got one like this. But he's got travel pictures and his kid and studio shots all on the same website. Very confusing to the client. Another photographer does very different type of work. Really like it. He's got his logo on the pictures. Very unusual type of photography. Looks really good. I like his stuff. And then he's got this picture, which has nothing to do with his other work, and he also got this picture. So your portfolio should be consistent if you're trying to do commercial work. If you just want to show it to your friends and relatives, you can do whatever you want. But if you want to do commercial work, you have to have a consistent message and say, this is what I do, and it should all be good. So often, I'll see something like this. Somebody will have a website, and you go to click on their portfolio, and they have a list that looks like that. That is not going to get you any work. It's too many choices. What do you do? Everyone can take a picture of anything, but what do you do well? And so to think I'm making this up, here's a photographer whose name I won't mention, and you can see that this person also had everything from animals and travel and still life and landscape and cityscape and flowers and nature. Not good. Another photographer, great studio shot, then has travel pictures, and then a travel picture that looks like that. And you got to be careful because, folks, your travel picture is competing with mine. So if you don't have good pictures, keep it off your website. Smug Mug is not a place to be a commercial photographer. You should have your own website. Here's another website from Stephanie Dinkle. Great fashion stuff, dynamite photographer. She has something really interesting. While I try to keep people from stealing my pictures, you can print her pictures right from her website because she wants them to be out there in the world. People aren't going to steal her pictures to use it. It's very different than my kind of work. And this way, maybe an art director will pass it on to somebody else in their office. So she actually encourages people to share her pictures. But great stuff, and then she's got this at the end. You know, it doesn't, how does this have anything to do with that? So be careful. Here's another photographer, I believe he's an architect, and he's got some nice pictures in here. But the trouble is, all his pictures are of the same project. So he's only done one thing. You know, best not to have a website until you have enough to show it, because clients are going to remember that and pass you over. If you don't have enough, don't open the store yet. And then the same photographer who did the architectural work has two pictures like this. Doesn't belong there. Another great, this is great work by Vitor. Dynamite photography. Wonderful stuff. And then on his website, believe it or not, he's got a picture like that. So I said, get that off your website, and he had music with it. Every art director, every editor will say, I can't stand it when people have music on their website. So if you have music, shut it off. My friend Terry Berenson, she only does pets, and that's all you see on her websites. Not her travel pictures, not her pictures of her grandchildren, just pets. Here's a lady who has some very nice pictures, and she just does portraits in maternity. That's what she says on the website. That's a nice combination, right? So the portraits are all kids. And she's got some really nice pictures here, very handsome, beautifully done. And then she's got this and this, you know, and these kids look like they've just seen Martians. It's not appropriate. Stick with the good stuff, you know, cull out. If you don't know how to edit your own work, get somebody who does. Christoph Kappa, I love his work. His stuff is great. But the note says he had music, so I told him, get rid of the music, because his pictures are so great, they speak for themselves. What's amazing about this guy, he's a New York City fireman, and his pictures are fantastic. Now, what he's done, which is, I've never seen this with anybody else, is he's got a button that says add to the lightbox. So you can click on his pictures that you like, make a lightbox out of it, and then email it to someone else. So an art director can say, hey, I like these, and send it to a colleague or send it to a client. So it's a really easy way of sharing pictures. This is kind of like pre-Instagram in a way, but it's very, very clever. If anyone's been to my website, I have this one. It says Photography and Computer Graphics for Industry, Medicine, and Technology. That's what it says, and that's all you'll see there. But I also do macro photography. That's my expertise. So I have a separate website for the macro photography. Close-up, macro, and video of the small, the tiny, and the minuscule. They are two separate websites. So if you want to do children and you want to do high fashion, put them on different websites is my advice. Another nice thing to have is something called a client lightbox, so that only your client can see the stuff on the website. If you're doing people, children, it's a good way of protecting the work and also making them feel a little more secure with the pictures. So Weber Carburetors called me. This was their ugly website. They wanted some new pictures. So I said, oh, sure, I can do something great. And what I did is I put together on my website, I put together a client lightbox where they could click, and then they have to put in a password. And then from, you can either do it from Lightroom or Photoshop, you can automatically upload these so-called galleries so that they feel they have a special place on my website, and they can go there and look at the pictures I'm proposing for their project. And the guy wrote me an email. He said, beautiful work, fine. He called it fine art. Can you imagine that? Right? He appreciates your work. And I said, wow, this guy is really going to be a good client. And I never heard from him again. Here's another one. Now, the email says, pay attention to what it says. We're looking for medical lab equipment and people showing precision, confidence, and expertise. Pay attention to what they say so you can assemble the right appropriate pictures. So I go into Photoshop. I have a great collection. I can find anything in 10 seconds with my Lightroom catalog, and I start putting together a lightbox just for this client, which I hope is exactly what they're looking for. And I even added something extra. I said, you know, I can do computer graphics, so I made a sub lightbox so they can see my computer graphics, and I thought I was really clever. And I got an email from her. She said, very nice and thanks, we'll be in touch. And guess what? She was never in touch. Oh well, that's the business. Here's another thing that I believe will help you tremendously. While we're all disconnected from the world, so to speak, in person, it's all done on your phone or on the internet. I believe if you can have a personal face-to-face meeting, it helps tremendously, and I have always done that. And when somebody says, send me something, I say, gee, you know, I'm in New York, I'd rather come and see you. And almost all the time they say, well, all right, if you want to come. You're selling your work, but you're selling your enthusiasm, you're selling your personality. And that goes a long way besides just pictures that anybody else can do. So, leave behind pieces. You got to have at least a business card, a brochure. The nice thing is now I can make brochures one at a time. On my printer, you can buy special paper, and I can make a brochure for the client that looks very different than the brochure I make for the person the next day. Or if you do a lot of similar work, you can have postcards made. So this is my fancy business card. So many people anguish over their business card. You don't need anything but contact information. That's all you need. On the other hand, I've printed a few thousand of these leave behind pieces. They're 5x8 cards done by Modern Postcard in California. And this is my macro leave behind piece. So when I go and see somebody, they see my work on the front, and on the back is a little PR, and it's also contact information. So it's something I can leave with them rather than walking out of the office. Okay, so you've done all your promotion. You've got your website working. You know how to deal with the contact calls in terms of what to show them. So let's talk about how you would do a typical freelance job. And the first thing always is the call, right? So here's a typical call. Ah, that sounds exciting. So Mary says, what do you think Mary says? Sorry, folks, that is not the way to handle a call. Let's try another call. All right. What's your day rate? You hear that all the time. So Louis says, maybe $600. So the client says, well, and so Louis says, okay, I guess. Right? And so Louis hangs up the phone and he says, yep, you did. That's what happened because you didn't handle it properly. So that's not the way to do it. Right? So the fact is, when you get a call, you've got to ask lots of questions. The client gives you almost nothing most of the time. You got to pull it out of them. Who, what, where, when, and why? Why did they call you? When someone calls you, that's wonderful. They didn't call someone else, they called you. that gives you a lot more leverage. Why did they call you? How important are the pictures? Is it a big deal or kind of a throwaway? How are they going to use it? Are they in a rush? I love when clients are in a rush. They'll always pay more. Do they have a budget? Maybe you can get a sense of how much money they have. And the big thing is take notes. So here's a typical scribble sheet next to my phone. The guy who wanted the carburetor shot, the first thing I do is get his phone number and write down, I'm listening to him, what he says. I don't talk, I listen to what he says and scribble down as many notes as I can. And then what I recommend, in fact, in handouts here on the last page, you've got a copy of this contact sheet. Keep it by your phone because you're new at this and you may forget to ask some of these questions. And this will help you do a better job, give a better price, and be treated fairly. So you're going to get details about the job before you give a quote. You don't give them a price over the phone the first time. Never, ever do that. So you've got to ask lots of questions, these kind of questions. What's the shoot? What format? You've got to get into the nitty-gritty details because that will determine the price. What are you going to deliver? I can't tell you how many times I know photographers never found out in the end what the client wants. Do they want prints? Do they want digital files? Are you going to upload it? Dropbox? I don't know. Did you ask? Well, I didn't really ask. Deadlines. Deadlines are very important to some clients and not important at all to others. That will determine the pricing. How many shots? Very often clients will always underestimate or lie about what they really want. They just say, don't worry, it's just a little shoot. Well, it's very often more than just a little shoot. So here's a job I just did last year, right? Client calls, says they have 30 earrings, and they're all the same size, so it should be easy, right? And I said, well, I can do that in one day. And so the client said, I don't have to do any retouching, and the lady's husband is going to do the Photoshop. I sent them a written agreement, right? And so I did a whole bunch of pictures for them, and it turns out the 30 earrings turned into this. It wasn't 30, it was a lot more. But I had the signed quote for 30. So the original quote was for that. But the final invoice was for that, because in writing we agreed on 30, and then they brought a lot more, and we had to shoot for 2 days. You can't complain. You told me 30, you signed for 30, and then you wanted 2 days worth of work done. So no problem. You don't have an argument with the client because everything is in writing. Before you provide the quote, get all the details taken care of. Do you need props? Do you need a model? Do you need to wear something special? Do you have to pick up something at a supermarket or at Macy's? And then the licenses, how are they going to use the picture? If it's a big client, you can get a lot of money depending on how they use it. If it's a small client, they probably just want to do whatever they want with it. Are there going to be delays, kill fees for high-end jobs? You're going to have to travel, ship, you have to drive somewhere. Are they going to pay for mileage, for parking, for the subway, for a taxi? All these things you should know before you give a price. And if you don't ask a lot of questions, you will not get the answers and you will give them a price that is unfair to you. And the other thing is, how important is the picture? Because that will determine how much they charge. If it's on the cover of an annual report or inside of a church bulletin, you charge very, very different prices. So all sorts of things to ask before you give a quote. Urgency, I love urgency. Right. Now this is, people say, I don't know what to charge this client, right? Here's something that's great. Look at this last sentence here. I use this all the time. The client says, what are you going to charge? And you say, well, on a project, I've done projects like this before, anywhere from $900 to $3,500. And the client says, oh, that's crazy. We can't afford $35. All we have is $2,400. You got your price. There it is. They told you how much they have. And so someone told me this a long time ago, and it works like a charm. Right? And so again, here's that sheet that should be next to your phone. You can modify it any way you want. So it forces you to remember to ask them lots of questions. Here's a job that came in a few years ago. This guy from Los Angeles wants some microchips photographed, and he wants me to recommend another photographer. So who do you think I could recommend? You betcha, right? And with the internet today, you can be anywhere in the world. I did a job recently for somebody in New Zealand. It's cool. So I sent him exactly the kind of pictures that I know he wants. So I figured the job is mine for sure. So he wrote back and he said, wow, thanks. So he wants more information. The poor guy's working for a startup company and they don't have much money. You know, I felt so bad about that, right? So what do? How do you know what size company it is and all? You do a Google search, right? And you say, wow, they have a pretty impressive website, but you know, it's a startup. Maybe they're working out of a garage. You know, I got to see if I'd be sympathetic. So I looked at pictures of their garage, right? So it's a pretty impressive garage, right? So anyway, I wrote back and I told them I needed to know much more. But the big thing is, please give me a call to discuss. You want to talk to people. The more you talk, the more information comes out. I took some notes. I sent him a quote, and it turns out that with all the details, it turns out the quote was that much more than over the phone, because now he wanted a lot more stuff, and he said it was too expensive. And what he said to me was, Lester, we can't spend $5,500. All we have is $2,500. Okay, that's the price, but I didn't lower my price and give him all that stuff. We changed what he wanted. I never lower my price just to lower it. We changed the quote. He doesn't get as much, but it meets his budget, right? So now we have a different agreement, and I got him to sign it in writing before, and he liked the proofs over the phone so much, he sent me a check for the whole thing before he even got the final pictures. And to see the kind of crazy stuff I do, that's the microchip, but I actually can photograph it this way, this close, and even a section of it. So that's my specialty. So 18 months later, here's what happens. This guy has left the company. Nobody knows me, but a lady calls and says, someone found your name on a digital file. Remember I showed you how I put my name under it or embedded in here? This is that marketing comes to roost. Oh, I'm so sorry. Their photos weren't very good. That's a shame. You know? So how much would I charge? Well, I'm going to charge that much. And I told them last time, that's, you know, I did that. Now she wants much more, so it's going to cost her $4,000. And she said, oh my God, we don't have that kind of money. These other guys only charged me $900 for the pictures she couldn't use. So I wrote her back. Very nice, explained what I do. I knew that there are very few people who do what I do. And if she's not satisfied with the pictures, she doesn't even have to pay. How's that for guarantee? Well, she said, I'll have to get back to you. And she did. And so I got $2,100 just at the deposit, which I didn't start to shoot until she sent me the deposit. And then this is the crazy stuff. These are tiny, almost under a microscope pictures. Now, sometimes a low fee is worthwhile. Years ago, I shot, this is for Reuters, their big computer center in Hauppauge near my house. These are old computer screens. I shot this for Time Magazine, and for Time Magazine, I got only $800. Magazines don't pay that much, and they paid me the 2-day rate for 1 day because they knew I wouldn't work for $400. So I shot it. But I got model releases, and I owned the pictures. Time Magazine only got used for 1 edition, right? So then Reuters called and said, we saw the picture in Life Magazine. We'd like to buy a bunch of copies. So $800 from Time and $3,000 more from Reuters. I own the picture. I have model and property releases, so then it became a stock picture. And if you look in my stock picture system, I sold that picture 23 times. And made another $1,800 because I owned the copyright and I had model releases and property releases. So the $800 job turned into a little more than $800. While I was there, I said, can I photograph some of your other facilities? And they said, sure, do what you want. And this guy gave me a model release, so this became another picture for stock, and that made another almost $4,000. Now, truth be told today, you will not make this kind of money in stock photography. The world has changed drastically. But the point is, I control the use of the picture. I control the copyright. I had model releases. And this is how you survive in the long run, by repurposing some of your work. So altogether, with both pictures, it came into a nice payday. Now, this does not always happen. I'm showing you a very nice example. So, how do you negotiate the fee? The big thing is have information. And then you can go back to the client and give a list of all the things you're going to do. Instead of just saying, okay, I'll do it for $2,000, you start saying, I'm going to give you this and this and this and this and this, based on what you heard them say over the phone, or preferably in a personal meeting. The more information you have, the better. Like anyone, the way you shop, they want to get the most for the least. And you know what the most common phrase is you're going to hear from clients? Ah, it's just this, it's just a few pictures. You know, it's no big deal, it's just this. That's what they say all the time. So don't be timid. Right? Now, when someone says the price is too high, as I said, don't come down in your price, which is what a lot of photographers do. You say, well, look, I still want to work with you. Maybe we can trim off some time or some number of pictures or digital file. I don't know what. But don't just come down. Can you go out there and buy a $6,000 Nikon and say, you know, I'm sorry, I only have $4,500. Why don't you give me the camera for $4,500 instead of $6,000? That doesn't work, and photographers shouldn't do that either. Right? So if you think you can do a good job, you should price it properly. Always find out what they need, and then decide on what you'll charge for all of the things that you finally found out what you need. And it's labor and expenses and extras that go along to make the final price. And how you do that will determine if you make enough or not enough. So the way you determine the price is you're going to have labor, or sometimes called the creative fee, and you have overhead. So some people base it on an hourly rate. When you do events, sometimes you get paid by the hour. But no one ever figures in all the wasted time, unfortunately. Or a day rate. So I go on location and I shoot for a day. But all the preparation, all the post-shooting handling is never a day. There's no such thing as a one-day job. Or sometimes I'll do a project that's very complicated, and I'll give the client a flat fee for the whole project, no matter what's involved, because I really know what's involved myself. You don't do this when you're a beginner, you'll get in trouble. So you're going to have expenses. So even if you do an hourly shoot, can you bill the client for transportation? Do you have to drive there? Do you have to hang out? Maybe they'll pay for lunch. You can take the subway. Try to get as much money in expenses. It doesn't look like you're making the money. It looks like, well, it's out-of-pocket expenses. Otherwise, it's coming out of your pocket and you're losing the money. Same with day rates. Now, when I do a project, sometimes I build in all the expenses. But I really have to know exactly what I'm doing and what the client wants. So these are typical expenses that you can add to your fee as a separate item so your bill doesn't look so big. Just the kind of things that all photographers have to deal with. But don't hide anything. When you send the client an invoice at the end and it lists a whole bunch of expenses that you never told them they would have to pay for, they're going to be really mad at you. So you hear things like this. Right? Oh, I assume. Can't assume. It has to be in writing. Or let's say you're doing fine artwork, right? And so most people assume that the gallery is going to pay for all of this. And you know what the gallery says? They think you're going to pay for all of that. Find this stuff out before, not after, folks. You remember this? So keep that in mind. Extras, I love extras, right? Extras always add. And I don't give this stuff away for free. Maybe you can't charge overtime for yourself, but you can usually ask for overtime for the assistant. All right, all of that. Now, is an example. I don't do simple little still lifes, but some local company asked me if I'd photograph this award they won. So I did it for $300. And I said, you know, by the way, I can make a nice big print for you. He said, oh yeah, that'd be nice. So for $4 in ink and paper, I made $81. But I didn't throw it in, it was extra, and if he had said no, I wouldn't have given it to him. So then for bigger clients, you've got to figure in the usage rights. You're not selling your stuff, you're licensing it. So you retain the copyright and you license specific rights. The bigger the client, the more specific you can be. So typical use by clients, some clients want everything forever and ever. You can do that if you want. Or you can limit the time period so they have to come back to you in a year or 2 or 3. Or for 1 month or 1 week. So small clients kind of want everything. And you have to decide how you're going to deal with that. And you hear things like this all the time from clients. They don't know anything about copyright. Now, you can give a client unrestricted rights. They can do whatever they want with it. But you own the copyright, and theoretically, you can do anything you want with it, except it's their face, their product, their building. So you can't do anything you want unless you have permission from them to use their building, their face, whatever. So it's a two-way street. Just because you own the copyright does not mean you can abuse their rights of privacy or property. So be careful. Right. So for example, let's say you were hired to do the, look how old those cell phones are, isn't that fun? So let's say you were hired to do the shoot by the phone company. And you should get model releases. And who do you get the model releases from for these 3 girls? From their parents, if they're under 18. And you say, oh, I don't need model releases because I can't do anything with it. Really? Well, if you go to the website, there's lots of pictures of teenagers with cell phones. And you might be able to repurpose those pictures if you own the rights and if you have model releases. So think about that. If they want everything, like if you do a wedding shoot, right? So you tell the client they can't give away the pictures to the caterer or anybody else. But you can't use them either unless they give you permission. You want to put their wedding pictures on your website, that's commercial use of their face and body, you can't do it. So usually in the wedding contract, you should put in, so everyone can see it, that you as a photographer have the right to use the pictures for your promotional activities. If you don't put that in, they can come after you. Because though you own the copyright, they own their bodies, so to speak. So if you do the local widget company, I usually put something like this in because very often I'm photographing some new machine in the factory. And clients want to give away my picture to the company that built the machine. So I put something like this in it so they can't abuse it. I'll give them a license, but they then can't take my picture and put it elsewhere. So when I send an invoice, and on the bottom it says usage rights granted, and it says this. Very clear. It's in the original quote too. I don't just hide it in the end when they get the invoice. It's always in the original quote. Here's another one. When you have a picture that's used in the book, you can usually control the size. It's the front cover, divider page, how long, all that kind of stuff. Different languages, each one of those things add to the cost and the value of the picture. If it's in 2 languages, you should get more than if it's in 1 language. Right? So all that stuff has to be there. Sometimes it's for a specific distribution. Let's say a friend of yours says, you know, I'm in this theater company and we're doing an off-Broadway play. We have no money. Would you take some pictures for us? You can be a good guy or gal and say, sure, I'll do it. But what happens if it becomes a blockbuster and now it's on Broadway next year? And you did all these pictures for free. You know, too bad. So you write a quote like this, which says, if you're successful, I want to benefit. If you're not successful, I'm happy to do it for you. So remember the book cover I did? Remember I told you, I got paid for the original shoot, but then when they wanted to come back later and do the audio cassette, I got another $1,500. You've got to control how your work is used. Or sometimes it's very short. So if Procter & Gamble wants to use it, it's a big company. They understand they have to pay for every little way, if it's a consumer ad or if it's a trade ad. If it's going to be on their website, it's going to be on the home page or on the subsidiary page. All those things go to make up the price for a big company. So I sell my pictures as so-called rights managed, not royalty free. So General Electric used one of my pictures, but they only used it for 1 month. And the next month they used a different one. So that's a very different rate than if they want to use it for a whole year. Clients will say, I want a buyout. A buyout is not a legal term. You have to find out what they mean. They want everything. Do they just want to use it for themselves? Do they want to put it on television? You've got to ask them what they mean by a buyout. They'll say, I want a buyout. And you'll say, well, for a buyout, I got to charge you $9,000. $9,000? You say, well, you may use it on television. Oh, no, we're not going to use it on television. Well, then fine, then I won't charge. But if you say you want it for everything, I have to assume you're going to use it for everything. So you got to have a conversation. Collateral, that's another term, right? It just means they want it for whatever they're hiring you for, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, like extras. So collateral is not a word that I like. I want to find out, what do you mean by collateral? Advertorial is another term you're going to hear because it's not a legal term, but it's an ad disguised as editorial that you may have seen in magazines. And they want to pay you less because they claim it's editorial, but it's really an ad for which you should be getting much more money. Work for hire, we talked about. If it's work for hire, you don't own the work. You can charge a lot, but you don't own it after you go click. That's the question everybody asks me. And the answer is this. You got it? This is not like buying something on Amazon. There is no fixed price in this business. So you've got to find out what the going rates are for the kind of work you do and where you work. People in a small town in the Midwest are not going to get the same prices as we get in New York. In fact, when I do work on Long Island, where I live, very different price structure than when I do work in the city. I don't think so, right? That's not the way you do it. What you should do is that, things like that. I strongly recommend you all join some professional organization. ASMP, APA, ASPP, it's so many of them. You'll learn so much by hanging out with people who do what you do. You can go online. Here's SMG Photography. She actually puts her headshots and prices online. So you get a sense. Now, maybe she lives, though, in a different place where you do. You can go to Alexa and get an idea of the ranking of some company if you want to find out how big it is. There's another website called Who Pays Photogs. It's at tumblr.com. And they have some listings where people have gotten jobs and talk about how well they got paid. Did they get stiffed for expenses, how long it took to get paid. And they had a chart recently about how prices have gone down in the last 5 years. But they also have specific places. You can't find everything, but this is the University of Texas newspaper, Wired.com, that's a big magazine. You want to work for Adobe. It says loss of rights. Well, that was the photographer's decision, right? 30 images assignment. Everything was swift until I delivered the images. They're still waiting on payment. Now, it's your fault if you're not getting paid on time. Anyway, you can go through all this stuff, just give you an idea of what's out there. You're going to hear this, right, a lot. If you hear that? And they say, oh, it's just a one-day job. So here's my list of what you do on a one-day job. Are we done? Of course not. Are we done? Of course not. Is this true? Anyone ever done a one-day job? Does it take all this time? You betcha. So when someone says it's a one-day job, it's never a one-day job, never. You have to understand that if you're going to be paid. So let's say somebody sees one of my pictures of these cute little kids in Mexico, and I have a release from the parents, and you want to know what to charge. As a stock picture, it's an existing picture, so that's a stock photo charge. And so I don't know what to do. It's very simple. You go to the Getty website, and you look for a similar picture, and then you plug in all the numbers as though it's a rights managed image, and you look here and you say, how is it going to be used? Advertising, printed display. And you plug in the size it's going to be on the page, and what the circulation is, and where it's going to be used, and on and on and on and on and on and on. You plug that in, and you wind up with a price. So then when the client says, that's ridiculous, you can say, but that's the kind of price that Getty would charge. And in fact, I take the price that Getty would charge and I add more. Because the client came to me for a specific picture, not one of millions that Getty has on their website. So that's what I do. And if the client says, that's outrageous, I can't pay that, I'm very polite and say, well, I understand, maybe you can find something else that meets your budget. That's the way I run my business. They came to me for a specific picture. It usually means they want it pretty badly. If they have a very low budget, then let them go and buy a $10 stock picture. And there are millions of those around, right? So this is what Getty plugged in for that picture. Client wanted some prints. I didn't know what to charge, so I went online to a lab that makes prints, and I based my prices not on what the lab would charge, but I added something special because I had the negatives at the time, and they needed prints from me, not just any prints from any lab. This is something you're going to hear all the time. Have you ever heard that? Yeah? Guess what, folks? Okay? You know what I say? I tell you what. I know you don't have a budget. Let me charge you the full price now, and I'll give you a break on the next job. Try that. People don't like me. All right, so decide on the fair price. Right? Never just lower your price, but change what you're giving them. Or give them more. So they say, well, it's really expensive. Say, well, I tell you what, I'll also do this and also do that. And so it's a negotiation. It's not buying something, it's serious. Get the clients to sign off on stuff. Oh, this is something, another thing. Have you ever heard this? We'll give you a credit line. First of all, it should come on any editorial work automatically. And what I like to say, credit line is not worth much. So this company called and said, we saw your great picture. I love when people say, we saw your great picture. It means they want to use it. And they were going back and forth, and they never talked about price. So I said, well, you know, we have to discuss fee. And she said, oh, we always pay $750. And I said, well, I'm sorry, you know, it's a special picture, and I'm sorry, I don't do that. Well, how much do you want? I don't know, $1,000, whatever I said, $1,500. And she said, oh, that's ridiculous, we don't pay that. I said, well, okay, I understand. Then you'll have to find something else. She said, well, that's terrible. Every other photographer takes our fee. Oh, well, fine. Maybe another photographer can provide what you want. She called back. I'm a tough guy. Right? Here's another one. National Geographic Kids called. They wanted to use one of my pictures. They said, we pay $300 for the back cover, the whole back cover. Guess what? Right? They wouldn't come down, I wouldn't come up. So, too bad. I'm willing to walk away when I don't think it's fair. Somebody saw this picture of mine. They wanted to use it in the textbook. They said, quote, short money, I'm afraid only $100. So I wrote back and said, if you can get other people to provide pictures for $100, good for you. For a textbook that can potentially sell thousands and thousands of copies, $100 is an insult. I wrote that back to her, and she said, No insult intended. I happen to know her boss from Henry, and so for that project, I got 0. I could have taken $100, but I'm sorry, I don't sell my pictures for a textbook where they're going to make a lot of money. No, you can't have my picture. All right, so more stuff. You got to send a written quotation because a quotation is a communications device. After you've written your notes on the phone, you say, here's what I think you want. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but the quotation allows you to see it, and it's a dialogue back and forth. This is what I intend to do. This is what it's going to cost you with maybe some extras. This is what I'm going to give you, and this is how you can use it. That's what a quotation is. The who, what, where, when, and why. The client gets it and can say, oh no, that's not exactly what I mean, or I don't think we want to pay for this, or maybe we also want you to do that. That becomes a dialogue. You know, it's not a gun to their head, it's a discussion, it's a communications device. And this is where all the misunderstandings happen because so many of my students who come crying to me don't have anything in writing. So that's my very strong advice. I hear this all the time. That's all I can tell you. It's your fault. If you're doing weddings, you can get a contract printed up automatically so you don't have to think about it. There's lots of wedding contracts online. Right, so this work I did for Centurion, I changed the name here, and I sent them a quotation. Here's what the quotation looks like. There's one paragraph that's a description of what I'm going to do as best I understand it based on what the client told me. And I sent that on April 3rd. Then I told them what they're going to get, the output media, how they're going to get it. They wanted some digital file and a color print because they told me they wanted that. When I'm going to deliver the project. Are they on a deadline or I'm going to stick to my schedule? How much I'm going to charge, and I give them a choice because they weren't sure on the phone what they wanted to do, or I could do it another way at higher resolution. It would cost them that. So in writing, I'm giving them a choice that they can select from. They wanted additional prints, so here's my list of additional prints that they might want. These are the license rights that they get. They can use it for in-house, but if they want to use it in a print ad, it's $500 more. It's all there in writing. Payment schedule, 1/3 up front before I even start, 1/3 when they've approved the final thing. Now, because of the macro work, a lot of people are unsure of what they're going to get. So I actually give people a guarantee that if they don't like the way it looks, they don't have to pay, if they think that technically it's not a good picture. So I stick my neck out all the time when I do work. I've never had to turn it down or give them their money back. So I send the quotation, right? And then she writes back and says, too expensive. So I don't call her back and say, drop dead, you know, I'm out of here. You don't do that, right? So we talk about, what are we going to do? Well, I changed the fee down to $1,200 there or that because I didn't just lower my price, but we changed what I'm going to do. Instead of me shooting the microchip, they're going to send me some big computer printouts of the chip instead. So now I don't have to do that part of the project. That's why it came down in price. So now, on April 5th instead of April 3rd, we've come to an agreement, and instead of a quotation in my computer now, I change it to an agreement, and we're happy. But by sending the quotation, they had something to look at. And then they sent me a purchase order with the right amount, including sales tax, and it was signed, and I got a down payment check first because that's what the deal was, and then this is what I sent them, and I gave them a variation, and because I'm a wise guy, when I sent the first proof, I said, gee, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my computer, I hope this is okay. But that's a joke, and you have to be careful when you joke with clients. I happened to think this lady was going to accept it, and she did. She laughed instead of screaming at me, right? Here's another quote. It just says, City of New York becomes the copyright owner. That's in the quote if you do work for hire. This says, packing and Federal Express is part of the job. In this case, other times it's billed separately. So all of this stuff is in the quote, let's not go through this. There's more examples of things where I get paid up front. This is interesting. I had some work done on the chimneys of my house. This is a guy who probably didn't even graduate high school. But look, he sends me a detailed list of what he's going to do, all the pieces, and I have to sign it on the bottom. He's not a photographer. This is a guy who did some work in my backyard. He says, what is he going to do very clearly? And on the bottom it says 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. He has to sign it and I have to sign it. That's business, folks, and photographers should be doing the same thing. These two guys didn't go to college. When you do the job, this is where you can avoid problems. Really, really, really. Don't guess what the client wants. They're paying you. So don't put in your creative instinct into it. You can do that, but also make sure you do what the client wants, not just what you want. Ask a lot of questions. It's all about communication. Make the job go smoothly. On and on and on. This is part of a job for CBS. I was brought in to be a hero. And before I did the important shoot, I went around to where I'd be photographing their superstars because it was fluorescent lights, and I wanted to make sure I got the color properly in each of the locations. So there's Robbie sitting in Mike Wallace's office so that when I went in to photograph Mike Wallace, I'd feel comfortable and know what the lighting was like in there. And this is where Dan Rather was in the newsroom, and this is Charles Osgood during a break. And so again, wherever I can, I try to scout the location so I can do a better job. And this is also true. Too bad, it's your fault. So make sure things go smoothly. That's preparation. Right? Make sure other people, if you're counting on other people, that's where it scares the heck out of me because not everybody is as anal as I am. All right. Yeah, this is where a lot of photographers get into trouble. The client says, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of that. And then if they don't, they blame you. I want to do a good job, right? That's also true. So don't be a pain. That's important. Just things that my philosophy here. So just more things, you know, we're running out of time. I've got another 4 hours worth of material, but I hope these are the kind of things that will keep you in good stead. I did this shoot at St. Joseph's Hospital. I will not give the client the pictures until I have a signed model release from the nurse and from who else? The kid's parents. What about this shot? I have one for the technician. The lady in the machine, I can't really see her. Should I have a model release? Yes, right? Now, you say, well, it's an editorial shoot. I don't need a model release. But if you shoot this and you have a model release, you can erase the logo in Photoshop and maybe turn it into a stock picture if you had a release. So you're going to need paperwork while you're shooting. All this stuff is important information. See this? It's always in my pocket. Always writing notes. I don't use my phone. This is a lot faster. I have lots of these notebooks. I believe this. Yeah. Right? Go all the way. I really believe this. Once I decide to do the job, whether I don't like the money or not, I give it my best and try to do a great job for the client. Remember this one I did for $300, which I almost never do. I still did a nice job, and then they came back the next year with more. And instead of just doing the boring shots, I also did some cool shots too. Even though I'm getting paid so little, I figured, what the hell? And of course, they chose the boring shots. You know. But they like me, and so every year now, they keep coming back. So from that silly little job, and I do this on my own time, it's a piece of cake to do. And so from the original $300 job, over the years, it's added up to over $2,000, just because I'm a nice guy and I went more than halfway for the client. I just want to, that's also true. I practice, even though I'm a professional, I've been around, I'm always trying out stuff in the studio before I use a new piece of equipment or a new kind of lighting, so that when I get there, I look like I know what I'm doing. So that's what I do. In terms of delivering the stuff, I never show an unedited shoot. I know a lot of photographers give the client the thumb drive or all the files. I just don't think that's right, because they're going to see all the crap that we all generate, and it makes you look less, right? So that's true. It's another thing too. Don't give someone one picture, because then the editor and art director have nothing to do. They want to edit and make decisions. So when I submit stuff to my stock photo agency, I know which ones are the good ones, but I always give them others, because in the end, they're going to turn down. Sometimes they pick the wrong ones, but I know what's good and I know what's bad. So I give them something to make them feel they have a job. Right? And when you deliver stuff, by the way, folks, after all that hard work, don't deliver jobs that look like this. All right? That's not appropriate. All right, so I'm afraid we're going to have to end here. There's so much more to know about photography, so that's what I have to say.